July 18, 1945. The edge of Yontan Airfield, Okinawa. The ground does not shake like it does from artillery. This is different. A deep, rhythmic churning that vibrates through the soles of Keiko's canvas shoes, traveling up her shins, settling in the pit of her empty stomach. The smell hits her first, not the copper tang of blood or the rot of the caves, but something acrid, sweet, and suffocating. Burnt diesel. Keiko, a 26-year-old former schoolteacher, now prisoner Summerforakwait, clutches the wire fence. Her knuckles are white. Ahead, a yellow beast, a massive caterpillar D8, roars to life, belching black smoke. It is not a tank. It has no cannon. Instead, a massive steel blade gleams in the harsh Pacific sun. A shirtless American, skin burned red, stands atop the machine like a demon driver. He doesn't look at the prisoners. He looks at a hill of limestone coral that has stood for centuries. With a careless flick of a lever, the engine screams. The blade drops. "They are going to fight the mountain," a young girl beside Keiko whispers, trembling. "The mountain will win." The steel teeth bite into the earth. The sound is a tearing screech of geology surrendering to industry. The hill moves. It simply moves. Keiko feels a crack in her mind, wider than the one opening in the earth. This is not war as the Emperor promised. This is something else. 6 weeks earlier, the caves of southern Okinawa, June 1945, southern Okinawa. The darkness of the cave was not empty. It was heavy, pressed tight with the smell of unwashed bodies, wet limestone, and the sickly sweet scent of gangrene. Keiko sat with her back against the dripping wall, her knees pulled to her chest. In her lap, her hands were clasped so tightly the knuckles ached, a silent prayer to a silent Buddha. There were 23 of them left, mostly old men, women, and 2 children whose eyes had grown too large for their shrunken faces. "Water," old Mr. Sato rasped, his voice sounding like dry leaves skittering on stone. "Hush, Sato-san," Keiko whispered, her voice cracking. "The demons are outside." She didn't know if they were demons, but the soldiers of the 32nd Army had told them, "The Americans are beasts. They will crush you with tanks. They will rape the women and eat the children. Honorable death is better." Keiko fingered the jagged shard of glass in her pocket. It was her contingency plan, her final duty as a daughter of the Empire. Outside, the tropical rain had stopped, replaced by a terrifying silence. Then, a sound. Crunch, crunch, crunch. It was the distinctive, heavy rhythm of boots, not the split-toed jikatabi of the Japanese defenders, but thick, leather-soled boots hitting the coral rock with the weight of well-fed men. A beam of light sliced through the cave entrance, blindingly white. It cut through the gloom, catching dust motes and the terrified eyes of the mother holding the baby in the corner. The baby, startled by the chama light, began to wail, a thin, piercing cry that echoed off the damp walls. "Shimata, damn it," Keiko hissed. The light jerked toward the sound. A voice boomed from the entrance, distorted and alien. "Date koi! Date koi!" Come out, come out. The Japanese was accented, clumsy, but understandable. It was followed by the metallic clack-clack of a weapon being readied. Keiko froze. This was it. The flamethrower would come next. She had seen the blackened aftermath in the northern caves. The liquid fire tanks. The Shermans the soldiers whispered about with dread. She gripped the glass shard. "Do it now," the voice of her education screamed. "Die with honor." But then, the baby cried again, and the alien voice spoke again, softer this time. "Mizu, water. We have water. No shoot." Keiko looked at the mother, whose eyes were wide with a terror that transcended politics. The baby needed water. Mr. Sato needed water. The Yamato Damashi, the spirit, could not quench thirst. Keiko stood up. Her legs trembled violently. She released the glass shard. It fell to the limestone floor with a tiny, insignificant tink. "I am coming out!" she shouted in English, a language she hadn't spoken since university in Tokyo. "Do not shoot. We are civilians." She stepped toward the blinding light, leaving the safety of the dark earth for the terrifying uncertainty of the surface. As she emerged, blinking against the harsh sun, she expected a monster. What she saw was a Marine, covered in mud, holding a canteen, looking not angry, but incredibly confusingly tired. The ride in the back of the 6x6 truck was a blur of nausea and diesel fumes. Keiko clutched the wooden slats, her body rigid. They were not taken to a ditch to be shot. They were taken to a city of canvas. The holding camp sprawled across the flatlands like a white fungal infection. Row upon row of pyramidal tents stretched to the horizon, precise and geometric. There were no defensible positions here, only an exposed grid of organization. "Out! Everybody out!" A Nisei interpreter, a Japanese American whose face looked like a brother, but whose uniform marked him as an enemy, waved them down. Keiko stumbled onto the gravel. Her group was herded toward a long, open-sided tent. The air here smelled strange, chemically sharp and sterile. Men in olive-drab fatigues stood with metal cylinders, pumping handles that hissed like snakes. Gas. The word flashed in Keiko's mind, cold and sharp. The propaganda posters in Naha had warned of this. They will experiment on you. "Line up! Clothes off! Burn the rags!" Keiko hesitated. Stripping naked in front of men? It was a violation deeper than death. But the Marines moved with the indifference of factory workers sorting parts. They took the lice-ridden monpei trousers and torn kimonos and tossed them into a burning pit. Shaking, Keiko stood exposed, shielding her chest with thin, grimy arms. A soldier stepped forward with the metal cylinder, a DDT duster. He shoved the nozzle down the back of her neck. "This is it," she thought. The poison, pfft, pfft. A cloud of white powder exploded against her skin, cool and chalky. He pumped it under her arms, into her hair, covering her groin. She squeezed her eyes shut, holding her breath, waiting for the burning in her lungs, the convulsions. She waited. 1 second, 10 seconds. There was no pain, only the dry, tickling sensation of the powder settling. "Next!" the soldier barked, already looking past her. She was shoved forward, handed a rough gray dress cut from surplus fabric, and then a small, wax-dipped cardboard box. She stared at it. Ration, type K, biscuit. She sat on the ground, dusted white like a ghost. The frantic itching that had plagued her for 3 months, the lice that had feasted on her blood in the caves, began to stop. The silence on her skin was deafening. Keiko opened the wax box. Inside were dry, hard crackers. She took a bite. It was tasteless, dry as dust, but it was food. She looked around. Hundreds of prisoners were sitting in the dirt, white-powdered, eating American biscuits. The Americans hadn't killed them. They had processed them. They had cleaned them with the same efficiency they used to fuel their trucks. It was humiliating. It was confusing. It was terrifyingly efficient. A guard pointed to a sector of tents near the wire perimeter. "Move it, Sector 4. As Keiko walked toward her assigned tent, the ground began to vibrate again. She looked up. Beyond the wire, across a flattened plain of coral, the jungle had been erased. In its place was something she couldn't comprehend. Early July 1945, Yontan Airfield Perimeter. For 3 days, Keiko did nothing but watch. From the edge of Sector 4, through the diamond mesh of the chicken wire fence, she observed the conquerors. They were baffling. They did not practice bayonet drills. They did not recite codes of honor. Instead, in the late afternoon heat, stripped to their undershirts, they played catch. Thwack. Thwack. The sound of a baseball hitting a leather glove traveled across the dusted ground. It was a sound from Keiko's childhood, before the government banned baseball as a corrupt Western influence. Watching these giants laugh and argue over a strike zone, she felt a strange, hollow ache. They are not serious, she told herself. They are children with guns. A soldier leaned against a parked jeep, a squat, ugly green vehicle that seemed to be everywhere. He tilted his head back and drank from a glass bottle. The liquid was dark brown. Coca-Cola. Keiko had only heard of it. The soldier finished the bottle and, with a casual flick of his wrist, tossed it into a pile of trash. Keiko stared at the discarded bottle glinting in the sun. Glass. Intact, perfect glass. In the caves, that bottle would have been a treasure, a canteen, a weapon, a tool. Here, it was garbage. The sheer waste of it made her dizzy. Her eyes drifted past the soldiers to the motor pool. It was a parking lot that stretched for acres, row after row of trucks, their olive-drab paint dull under the dust. Not just trucks, but strange, clawed machines with massive tires and yellow paint peeling off the steel. On the door of a passing truck, she saw a painted insignia. A cartoon bee wearing a sailor's cap, holding a Tommy gun in its hands and a wrench in its belt. It looked ridiculous. A cartoon? For a military unit? Imperial soldiers die with the chrysanthemum on their rifles. These men fight with a cartoon bug. Work detail! The shout snapped her attention back to the gate. An MP stood there, flanked by a Japanese interpreter. Need 10 bodies, the MP said, chewing gum. Clear brush. Sector 6. Who wants to go? The other prisoners shrank back. To work for the enemy was collaboration. It was shame. But Keiko looked at the cartoon bee again. She looked at the machines parked silently in the distance. She needed to know. She needed to understand how an army that threw away glass bottles and painted cartoons could burn an island to the ground. She stood up, brushing the dirt from her gray dress. She raised her hand. I will go, she said. The MP nodded, indifferent. All right, Mama-san, hop in. July 1945, Sector 6 work site. The heat on Okinawa was a physical weight, pressing down on the back of Keiko's neck. The task was simple. Clear the shattered limestone coral from a patch of muddy ground to make way for a drainage ditch. Keiko bent down, her fingers raw and wrapped in rags. She picked up a jagged chunk of coral, heavy and sharp, and placed it into a woven straw basket. Heave, she whispered to the woman next to her. Together they lifted the basket, stumbling toward a pile 10 meters away. It took them 3 minutes to fill the basket, walk, dump it, and return. Their breathing was ragged. Sweat stung Keiko's eyes. This was how fortifications were built in the Imperial Army. Muscle, sweat, and sheer will. 100 baskets make a wall. 1,000 make a fortress. Rumble. The ground shook. Keiko froze, clutching her empty basket. A massive 6-wheeled beast emerged from the tree line. It was an International Harvester M5H6, its dull green paint coated in a layer of red dust. It didn't stop. It roared straight toward their pile of rocks. Look out! Keiko screamed, pulling the other woman back. They scrambled into the mud, expecting the driver to shout, to brandish a rifle, to punish them for being slow. Instead, a man standing on the running board of the truck, shirtless, wearing a green cap with the bill flipped up, didn't even look at them. He was looking at the driver. He raised a closed fist. The truck screeched to a halt, inches from the ditch. The man on the running board flicked his hand open, palm facing back. Dump! With a high-pitched whine of hydraulics, the entire bed of the truck rose into the air. The tailgate swung open. Whoosh! 3 tons of crushed coral poured out in a single violent cascade. In 5 seconds, the truck had deposited more stone than Keiko's entire team could have moved in a week of back-breaking labor. The bed lowered with a clank. The engine roared. The truck reversed, spun around, and sped off to get another load. Keiko stood there, her hands still gripping the handle of her pathetic straw basket. She looked at the mountain of rock the truck had just birthed effortlessly. She felt a strange sensation in her chest. It wasn't fear. It was a crushing sense of obsolescence. The Empire taught that spirit overcame steel, that if they worked harder, endured more pain, they would win. But the truck didn't feel pain. The truck didn't get tired. The truck didn't care about spirit. A Seabee with a shovel walked past them, lighting a cigarette. He pointed to the side of the road with his thumb. "Move over, Mama-san," he said, not unkindly. "You're in the way of progress." Keiko dropped her basket. It landed in the mud, empty and useless. July 12, 1945, Yontan Airfield Extension. The rain had returned, turning the cleared red clay into a sucking quagmire. Keiko stood near the drainage ditch, watching the field with a grim sense of satisfaction. General Mud, the soldiers called it. Even the American trucks were sliding now. No plane could land in this soup. Nature was resisting. Then, the noise began. A rhythmic, metallic clanging that sounded like 1,000 temple bells being struck at once. Clang, clang, clang. A line of Seabees moved onto the mud. They weren't carrying rifles. They were carrying long, rectangular steel planks. Each plank was 10 feet long, punched with rows of large circular holes to reduce weight, looking like the skin of a giant industrial grater. Marston matting. Keiko watched, mesmerized. It was a human conveyor belt. 2 men would sprint forward with a plank. Drop. 2 men behind them would slot the bayonet hooks into the slots of the previous plank. Click. A 3rd team would swing heavy sledgehammers to lock the spring clips. Clang. They didn't fight the mud. They simply floated over it. The line of steel moved forward at a walking pace. 10 feet, 20 feet, 50 feet. "Faster! Get that line tight!" a chief petty officer yelled, his voice cutting through the rain. Keiko felt a chill that had nothing to do with the damp weather. This was not construction. It was weaving. They were knitting a carpet of steel across the surface of the earth. She looked down at her own feet, sinking into the soft soil. The Japanese army dug into the earth to hide. These men paved over the earth to dominate it. Within an hour, a silver road stretched across the swamp. A jeep drove onto it immediately, its tires humming on the metal ribs, spraying water through the holes, but moving fast. Too fast. Keiko realized then that time was different for them. For Japan, time was endless endurance. For the Americans, time was an enemy to be killed with steel. But as her eyes followed the gleaming new runway, her gaze hit a wall. Literally. At the far end of the valley, a massive ridge of jagged coral limestone stood like a fortress wall, blocking the path of the steel carpet. It was ancient, solid rock. The steel mats could not go over it. A flicker of hope returned to Keiko's chest. You cannot weave steel over a mountain, she thought. Even you cannot do that. July 15, 1945, the northern end of the runway. The coral ridge stood defiant against the gray sky. It was a jagged spine of fossilized limestone, ancient and sharp as broken teeth, rising 20 feet above the mud. To Keiko, it looked like a fortress built by the gods of Okinawa themselves. This is too hard, she thought, clutching the wire fence. Even their steel mats cannot climb walls. She watched a group of officers gather near the base of the ridge. They weren't pointing at maps. They were pointing at the rock, kicking it with their boots. One of them shook his head. Explosives were out of the question. The fuel dumps were too close. Keiko smiled grimly. They were stuck. The American juggernaut had finally hit a wall it couldn't buy its way through. Then, the ground began to tremble. A low, vibrating thrum that was deeper and heavier than the trucks. From the motor pool, they emerged. Not one, but 4 of them. They were monsters. Painted in CB yellow that was chipped and scarred from battle, the Caterpillar D8 bulldozers clanked forward on massive steel tracks. They didn't move fast like the jeeps. They moved with the terrifying inevitability of a glacier. Keiko had seen small tractors before in the fields, but these were beasts of war. Mounted on the front of each was a massive, curved steel blade, controlled not by hydraulics, but by a complex system of cables and pulleys that ran over the top of the engine block like sinews. The drivers, skinners, the Americans called them, sat exposed on open seats high above the ground, wearing no armor, only goggles and caps. They looked like mahouts riding steel elephants. The 4 machines lined up abreast, facing the ridge. They sat idling, their diesel engines chugging a heavy, rhythmic beat that resonated in Keiko's chest cavity. Black smoke puffed lazily from their vertical exhaust stacks. The lead skinner, a burly man with a cigar clamped between his teeth, looked up at the 20-foot wall of rock. He didn't look worried. He looked bored. He reached for the lever. The cables tightened. The massive steel blade lifted a few inches off the ground, poised like a guillotine. Keiko's breath caught in her throat. Surely not, she thought. You cannot fight a mountain with a tractor. The skinner revved the engine. The lazy chug-chug exploded into a deafening, high-pitched scream of pure torque. Black smoke erupted into the sky, blotting out the sun. The monsters lurched forward. July 18, 1945. The ridge. The roar was absolute. It was a physical wall of sound that drowned out the wind, the distant aircraft engines, and even Keiko's own heartbeat. Keiko gripped the wire mesh until the metal bit into her palms. This was the moment. July 18th. The moment she had sensed in the beginning. The 4 D8 caterpillars surged forward in a phalanx. The lead machine, driven by the shirtless demon with the red skin, hit the base of the ridge first. Screech! The sound of hardened steel biting into fossilized coral was like the shriek of a dying animal. Sparks flew, blue and orange showers visible even in the daylight, as the blade scraped against the flint-hard rock. The bulldozer did not stop. It shuddered, its tracks slipping for a fraction of a second on the loose marl. Then the cleats dug in. The engine note dropped an octave, deepening into a guttural, earth-shaking growl as the torque peaked. Keiko watched, eyes wide, waiting for the machine to break, waiting for the axle to snap, waiting for the mountain to throw the intruder back. Instead, the mountain groaned. A crack, jagged and dark, appeared in the white limestone face. With a sound like a thunderclap, a boulder the size of a small house sheared off. The blade caught it. The engine screamed, black smoke pouring from the stack in a solid column, and the machine pushed. The massive rock slid sideways, tumbling into the depression below with a ground-shaking thud. "They are killing the island," the young girl beside Keiko whispered, repeating the fear from weeks ago. But Keiko couldn't speak. She was witnessing the death of a philosophy. The other 3 dozers attacked the flanks. They worked with terrifying coordination, like a pack of wolves tearing apart a carcass. One ripped the earth loose, the next shoved it into the void. The third leveled the debris. It was violent, but it was also surgical. Dust rose in choking white clouds, coating the sweaty skin of the operators. They looked like ghosts riding dragons. The shirtless driver reversed, his tracks clanking loudly, then slammed his machine forward again. Bam! Another bite. Another ton of earth erased. In 20 minutes, the ridge, the ancient barrier that had stood for millennia, was gone. It wasn't just defeated, it was humiliated, reduced to a flat, white scar, ready for the steel mats. Keiko felt her knees give way. She sank to the dirt floor of the compound. The vibration of the engines traveled up through her legs. Japan had built the battleship Yamato, the greatest ship in history, and sent it to die. But these Americans, they didn't build monuments. They built machines that ate monuments for breakfast. The Yamato Damashi, the spirit of Japan, was unbreakable. But standing before a caterpillar, D8, Keiko realized with a hollow finality, spirit has no mass. It cannot stop steel. The engine noise began to fade to an idle chug. The dust settled on Keiko's face, tasting of chalk and defeat. The path was clear. July 18, 1945, late afternoon. The dust from the demolished ridge had barely settled when the first truck rolled over the flattened earth. It didn't hesitate. It drove over the grave of the mountain as if it had always been a road. Keiko sat on a wooden crate near the perimeter, her body drained of adrenaline. The violence of the bulldozers was over, replaced by a hum of efficient traffic. A jeep pulled up near the fence. The driver, a young Seabee with grease-stained cheeks, hopped out to check a tire. He noticed Keiko staring at him through the wire. He didn't see an enemy anymore. He saw a woman covered in dust, defeated and small. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a thick, dark bar wrapped in wax paper. He walked to the fence and tossed it over. "Catch, Mama-san." It landed in the dirt at Keiko's feet. She stared at it. Hershey's tropical chocolate. In the caves, the officers had said American food was poisoned. They said to starve rather than accept their charity. But the officers were dead. The caves were empty, and the mountain was gone. Keiko picked up the bar. It was heavy, dense. She peeled back the paper. The chocolate was dark, almost black, designed to withstand the tropical heat without melting. It looked like a piece of slate. She took a small bite. It was hard, waxy, and not as sweet as the milk chocolate she remembered from before the war. It had a coarse, oat-like texture. But as it softened on her tongue, the sugar hit her blood like a drug. It tasted of cocoa and calories. It tasted of factories in Pennsylvania that never stopped running, of ships that crossed oceans without fear, of a nation that could turn luxury into a standard ration for millions of men. It tastes like the future, she thought. A low roar built in the sky. Keiko looked up. A massive silver plane, a C-54 Skymaster, banked low over the camp, its 4 engines droning a song of endless supply. It lined up with the runway, aiming for the very spot where the mountain had stood an hour ago. The wheels touched down on the Marston matting. Screech. Clank, clank, clank. The plane taxied past. its cargo door already opening to reveal crates of ammunition, mail, and medicine. Keiko finished the chocolate. She wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. The Yamato Damashi was a beautiful dream, she realized. But dreams wake up. She stood, dusting the white coral powder from her gray dress. She turned to the young girl beside her, who was still trembling. "Come," Keiko said softly. "Eat. We have to live." She looked back at the bulldozer one last time. It sat silent now, cooling in the twilight. A yellow beast resting after its meal. The war wasn't over yet. Not officially. But here, on this flattened patch of earth, it had already been decided. Not by guns, but by the engines that moved mountains.